levels of hacking and levels of sophistication, and we've seen very sophisticated state-run hacking. But a lot of the day-to-day hacking is done with social engineering, for example. So getting you to convince, or getting an employee to be convinced that I'm away and I need access to some system, but I've been locked out. Can they please? Or social engineering your grandmother who might not understand things. Well, the components to that are all very automatable.
What are some of the biggest safety challenges that companies are facing right now when they're implementing AI tools?
Have policies in place as an enterprise to protect yourself, like dual approvals, things like that. Yes, we're going to see everybody double down on these policies that protect themselves. On a personal level, very hard, the cat and mouse game. And unfortunately, I think that the criminals always have one little step ahead in this arms race. My mother-in-law had a phone call from my son who wasn't my son.
Do you think that with phones, Apple devices are maybe more secure than Android devices?
Oh, I think a lot of the security issues stem from the actual phone network infrastructure. How do you protect yourself from phone hijacking? It's very hard to do at the consumer level. It has to be the infrastructure that helps.
Yeah, let's start it. Let's know about Autoalign. How did you come up with this idea and when all of it started?
Yeah, so I've been in AI for too many years now, probably 15 or so. I was doing a master's at UC Berkeley, met a crazy CMU professor who was doing a startup in medical search with AI, and joined him in San Mateo. And it was actually some pretty powerful technology, and sold to Microsoft, helped them on being on the search engine. And then from there, I just always stayed in AI and did another startup that really struggled for a bit. We were selling AI to banks and financial institutions, and they didn't know how to deploy it and didn't understand how to measure the risks. And so that was actually the genesis when we started to look at how to systematically understand AI risk, and joined two other co-founders, created a company called Armilla, which is now very focused on analytics and assessments of AI risk. But when generative AI came along, we saw that all of those systems were failing when we tested them. They were, getting eye-popping results on the one hand. On the other hand, they were systematically failing. They were inconsistent. They had biases. They had data leakage problems, hallucinations, right? And so that was the genesis of Autoalign, when we said, look, we can actually go and help try to prevent these issues. And so we spun out Autoalign. It launched its first product in April called Sidecar. And it's a safety system that sits beside your model. And it works with your model to try to prevent those things. And it makes it much more robust for enterprises to try to deploy those systems. They can have that layer of security on top.
That's amazing. So you started in April 2023, right?
April 2024 actually launched formally this year, the Autoalign. Now, that said, we had a lot of work done in the spin-up leading up to that. So we worked with some of the top labs. We were excited there to work with Mila, which is Joshua Bengio there in Montreal, and then the Vector Institute we worked with as well, which is top lab institution with Jeffrey Hinton in Toronto. Yeah, so a lot of work went into it, but it has some great approaches. It's a little different than just people say, oh, are you just like putting up guardrails, filtering requests? And we definitely can act in that way, but it's more about mitigating. So if it finds issues, it tries to fix them. And so it becomes much more robust, and your outputs that come out are much more consistent. It's not just filtering out queries and saying, sorry, I can't answer you, right? Which gets very frustrating for users when they're trying to put through a legitimate query and something's going wrong along the way, or your guardrail thinks that there might be some harm. So instead of saying, no, we can't answer you, it actually then works with the model to try to fix it and then provide a best or better answer.
So, your background is AI and security both. So you started about 15 years ago. So it's a amalgamation of both the things.
Yeah, and we saw the two come together. AI safety means different things to different people. If you look out with AGI, AI safety could mean, trying to prevent robots from eating your brains on the one extreme, right? Which hopefully they won't. But there's a much more practical side to AI safety today for enterprises who need to uphold either call them, trustworthy AI or responsible AI principles. They want to put the right safeguards in place. And part of that is security. So making sure they can't be jailbroken, making sure they can't be hacked, that data is not leaking, and or that they're not responding incorrectly, right? So a lot of the problem with today's models is that they can be very convincing, even though they're wrong. And so it used to be, okay, the model was wrong, and you could just say that's silly. That's a silly model. It's wrong. Now it's like wrong, and it's very convinced that it's right, and it's can convince you that it's right too, and that's very dangerous in itself. So all of those things comprise AI safety.
Yeah, I think they learned from social media how to be convincing and keep on saying all the all the stupid things, but still be convincing. Yeah, I think.
They learned from my son, who, as a teenager, is always convinced he's right, even in the face of facts.
So yeah, so we can safely say that AI is teenage. Although
Yes.
it has that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like my teenage kid.
I hope he's not listening to this.
Don't worry, he doesn't listen to anything I put out.
Perfect teenage kid. We don't know much about firewalls and generative AI. What are the possible scenarios that many people like me do not understand? That if we use generative AI models, they could be used to hack, to jailbreak or do anything. How does that happen? How are hackers using it? I would want to understand how they are doing it.
It's it's definitely a bit of an arms race. A lot of hacking at I'll call it, there's different levels of hacking and levels of sophistication, and we've seen very sophisticated state-run hacking. But a lot of the day-to-day hacking is done with social engineering, for example. So getting you to convince, or getting an employee to be convinced that I'm away and I need access to some system, but I've been locked out. Can they please? Or social engineering your grandmother who might not understand things. Well, the components to that are all very automatable. And if you can put those together, generating content in a realistic way, that creates the ingredients to be much more sophisticated in your social hacking. So here's a quick example. Let's take me. I'm traveling. I'm away. I post a link on LinkedIn that I gave a talk somewhere or was at a conference. You can now create an AI agent that will look for those things, right? So now it knows, okay, Dan, the CEO of Autoalign, is away at this conference. Now it can go and take what it thinks might be, guess my email or find it, send an email to an employee saying, hey, I'm at this conference and I've been locked. Now it's much more convincing, the email, right? Because it's actually based on some fact. It's not just random. And it can take something like a supplier and research, hey, are there any connections to Autoalign that they know of the vendors that we might owe money? And say, hey, I'm the vendor and Dan said he's away on the conference. Please pay me. Here's my account. It's overdue. And you guys are going to get shut down otherwise. To my AP, and without the right controls, they might go ahead and pay that. Maybe it was a $10,000 invoice, realistic for a software vendor. They go ahead and pay that to the account that they sent, right? And meanwhile, I come back and say, hey, I'm back now. And they say, good, we paid the bill for you, Dan, right? So that's the level of sophistication that's very automatable now with AI. It doesn't take genius, and you can do it at scale. you can go and do that systematically at scale, trolling through LinkedIn, trolling through whatever. So you can get to that base level of sophistication that fools, it only needs to fool 1% more, right? Go from a 0.5% success rate to 1.5. And that's a very then lucrative business. So it's things like that, that what we're seeing now today, that they're, and then there's the other extreme where, how is this helping at the state actor level? It can do a lot more mining. It can bring a lot more information in, but there's still a lot more human touch at that level as well, and expertise. So it depends, so it's being infused in different ways. Now, can we protect? It is an arms race. So all of the security providers are all trying to provide protections on top of that as well. And the cat and mouse game. And unfortunately, I think the criminals kind of always have one little step ahead in this arms race. So that's my assessment of the current, landscape.
Wow, that's a huge use case, and something like this happened inside Illumins, inside our organization. I did not know that AI could do it, but maybe it was AI because once we had few holidays here, and I don't know how AI found out that we had summer holidays because not many companies have summer holidays at the time that we have. And one of my teammate, many of my teammates were sent email that, hey, I'm at a conference and I could not get back to you, and I'm in urgent need of money because my cards are not working right now. Can you just send to me through UPI? It's a payment system in India, to this number. And one of my teammates fell into that trap and sent about $1,000 to that account. And then at that account immediately asked, hey, I need about this much amount more. And he was going to send it, but then he realized that why would I need I need money, and why would I send another phone number? So then he called me and I was like, wow, you did something which you should have done at first. You should have easily called me and you should have checked email, because the email had my name, but it was not my email address. So sometimes people can prevent attacks like this by looking at, how genuine the thing is. But that happened with me, and this poor guy, spent a paying about $1,000, and we could not help. Or even banks could not find where did it go. So, wow, AIs can do that, and that's gonna be on a high multitude level. So you're solving that, right?
So we're helping organizations think about it. There's a few fronts where you can help, and so we're not doing everything in the space, but one good piece is training, right? And there's going to be more and more training coming out for employees that is specific to AI. So there's security training already, and that's being extended to how to think about AI. There's also training on how to use AI properly and how to recognize, how to question. A lot of folks thinking about AI as there's a natural machine bias where they think about it as being right unless proven otherwise. And there's studies that have been done. And so when they start to use these tools, they give it the benefit of the doubt, and you really shouldn't. You should be questioning. You should be skeptical, just like you should be skeptical of the machines that are coming out here and of the sort of spam messages or the spam that you have to look at the actual address. And so there's a training part to it. There's also, what enterprises can do themselves to protect themselves, that software layer. And we're focused on that software layer where you can deploy those systems. And we have a layer that they can put in place to help protect their employees. And so that's sort of our essence. Now, when they're building AI systems, they also have to test and make sure that they're robust. We come in and we help put that layer on to protect them.
That's amazing. One thing that you mentioned was that AI can take your social footprint, and then the AI agents can use it against you. That means anyone, right? If I'm able to create an AI agent nowadays, you can create AI agents easily, and I ask it to look at, because as humans we have social footprints everywhere. So I can give it the link that this is Dan's profile on LinkedIn, this is on X, and this is on Facebook. Maybe this is on Instagram or other channels. So the agent would know where you are, what you're doing, and this and that. So how can normal general public be saved by this? This is just a normal question. And because there would be phishing attacks, and with speech recognition, because we both are talking, AI can take our speech and it can maybe call my mom and say that, hey, I need money, can you please send it? That's already happening, but what are we going to do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really scary. I think there's a few fronts there, and there's a lot of research on detecting or putting in watermarks, detecting what's AI generated or what's not. There's a lot of research being done on it, but that also is a cat and mouse game. Anytime you come up with a system that definitively says this is generated by AI, there are other systems that can go and obfuscate and try to hide the fact that it's generated from AI. Calling the voice recognition systems is very dangerous. I wouldn't trust Voice ID as much anymore, right? The voice fingerprinting. I wouldn't trust somebody calling, and so that's the level of sophistication. You can, if you're a state actor and you have a phone and you can get hold of SIM card ID or their phone number, and they can spoof that it's coming from that person and they can make it sound like that person, right? That can be a very convincing attack. So I think we are in a bit of trouble. I mean, everybody's working on phone security, on preventing these things, but they're very doable. And it's like, how do you protect yourself from phone hijacking? It's very hard to do at the consumer level. It has to be the infrastructure that helps. Can you try to recognize things? Can you have policies in place as an enterprise to protect yourself, like dual approvals, things like that? Yes, we're going to see everybody double down on these policies that protect themselves. On a personal level, very hard. My mother-in-law had a phone call from my son, who wasn't my son, right? Going back, trying to get information or trying to get her probably to send money at some point. But she realized when he was answering some questions the wrong way, right? But these are happening today. We do have to be very careful, and it's largely an education thing at this point.
Yeah, I hope someone does something, at a government level, or companies come out and create a standard, because what would happen is that in society there is already trust deficit in between people, and this is gonna be on another level. If my friend calls me and he's in real help, and I would start thinking that maybe this is another spam or AI generation, I can like easily be in office and I can easily click, okay, this is some AI BS there, and I'll just simply click it and end the call. So, but if he was really in help, it
Yeah.
seems really really bad. And another question is, do you think that with phones, Apple devices are maybe more secure than Android devices?
Oh, I think a lot of the security issues stem from the actual phone network infrastructure, and it's independent of the devices. So there's a lot there that can be done independently, tracing phones, tracing locations, hacking numbers, intercepting calls. That's at the network level. So, I don't want to give anyone nightmares, but it at that level, it doesn't matter what you do on your personal phone. It doesn't matter how secure your phone is. Now, how you choose to communicate, SMS is less secure for sure, and so if you can keep within a secure form of communication, like WhatsApp has end-to-end encryption. There's other forms, obviously that are out there. But if you can keep to something like that, it's more secure than SMS, and that's a good tool for securing when you have sort of some trust of who's on the other side. Obviously, like if there's Signal and alternatives that are built around security as a principle. Yeah, so there's steps like that you can take regardless of whether you have an Android or Apple device. If they insist on multi factor authentication, right? So that's where you're either have an SMS or you have a device that you're verifying. Of those levels, and Google offers this on Android with their accounts as well, the least secure is SMS. So if you have some authenticator or device level authentication where you actually are on your device and authenticate, or you're entering in a code from an authenticator, that's more secure than SMS. And so it's, there's steps you can take, SMS being the least secure, I would say, for that authentication. But you can also choose to communicate on something that's encrypted end to end, like WhatsApp.
So, what you mean to say is that if my telephone provider, that network is not secure, we are done. And how to find out if the telephone provider is secure or not, because common people cannot know that. But at the same time, these hackers, they cannot go inside our devices, right? They cannot go inside our applications and find out the data or something.
Right. Generally, your device is generally secure. A lot of the flaws network providers are working around, so it's not even network provider dependent. They have some different safeguards. They can block to certain degrees. They look for anomalous activity and can block it. But there's fundamental problems with the protocols that make them less secure. And so to a degree, it also doesn't matter what network provider you choose. You have to understand that cell phone communication is inherently insecure. Now, that said, generally, they're not hacking into your device itself. They're generally hacking into your accounts. So when it's that your Google account is breached, and they can see everything in your Google account, in your Microsoft account, or in your Apple account, and they're taking over at the account level, or your Uber account, or your Netflix account, right? Now, they're taking over at the account level and can see what's there, and they can bill from there. And that's generally what they're taking over. They're not taking over your device, usually on the phone level. At the computer level, it might be taking over portions, they might be encrypting, right? But they're generally looking to do things with your accounts, or they're encrypting in the case of ransomware and getting you to pay to unlock. But yeah, it's generally, from a mobile phone standpoint, generally not taking over your device. They're generally trying to either use it as a communication conduit or taking over accounts and using those.
So, the reason can be that many common folks, the ones who are not in tech, or maybe some in tech as well, use the same email and password for maybe all the different accounts. So if I as a hacker can find one, I may be using that login to go into many different famous websites and try that. So people should have different passwords for different accounts.
Absolutely. And there's nothing worse than having an account that's hacked with a shared password that you've shared with all that has the same for your financial institutions. Because the first thing they're doing is, okay, we have a username password. Does that also work for their bank? Right. And so if nothing else, take all of your financial institution accounts and give them unique passwords.
What are some of the biggest safety challenges that companies are facing right now when they're implementing AI tools inside their organization?
Yeah, so we see a lot of enterprises, I think, rightfully going slow when they're implementing tools. They're concerned about some of the
data leakage.
Robustness. Pardon me?
Data leakage?
They're concerned about some of the security, privacy issues, data leakage. They have choices of either deploying against like a OpenAI chat GPT. They might be using their API on OpenAI's premise, and they have concern about sending all this information over and then the AI learning from it, and then suddenly all of their secret sauce is there available for training. They have concerns about PII leakage. They have concerns. So actually people entering in customer information, sending it over when they shouldn't be, and suddenly they're in violation of GDPR or another privacy concerns. They have concerns about confidential information. So not even PII, but maybe somebody's putting in a a sensitive legal document and asking for an analysis of it, and suddenly that's gone over, right? And they're in violation of their customers' policies, and there's a bunch of leakage concerns. There's a bunch of concerns about information coming back that might be, for example, taken and misconstrued. We have cases of lawyers taking case law and putting it into their briefings, and the case law doesn't exist, right? Or giving back erroneous information, and then either directly to their clients or to customer service support teams that are then feeding that to the wrong information to their customers. So there's a lot of wariness there. And so we're putting up those barriers with Sidecar that allows them to filter on the way out. So they could filter confidential information, they could filter PII, and on the way in, it's going to assess whether there are issues. For example, is that contact on information coming back in contrast or in violation of one of their own policies? And so we can compare it to their policies and say, no, this information actually is erroneous. We can compare it to the regulatory requirements that they have and say, is this in violation of any of those or their compliance requirements? And so we can filter on both ends with that Sidecar, and then that allows them to have some assurance. But without that, they're often failing. So we see a lot of enterprises trying to do this stuff, and then they realize they can't put it into production. And so it becomes this failed POC, or a lot of R&D money spent without something going into production. So they really need that last mile to be solved. And this is one way to solve it. We also see them working out different agreements with their model providers. That's another layer where they can say, okay, you can't use my information for training purposes. Some of the model providers will provide that in an enterprise layer. So there's different approaches addressing different concerns, but there's just a whole bunch of concerns today that do need to be addressed, or they can't put these out into production. Even then, they tend to be working on applications that are internal facing. So they're building out applications that are for their customer service teams or their compliance teams or their internal staff, and not sharing these directly with their customers. And we've seen some cases where there are chatbots that have been out with customers and being used for customers. And then you have the added issues of, well, what if the customer jailbreaks this and gets it to say something funny or silly or harmful, and then they tweet about it and of course screenshot it and put it on the web, or it's in violation of one of our policies and they actually take it seriously. There was here in Canada, there was the Air Canada example where there was a bereavement policy where the chatbot misspoke, and it said that you could apply for it after the fact. And so the person took his flight and applied for it, and they said, no, you can't do that. You have to do it before. Right. So there are those types of issues, and that becomes a big PR issue or reputational issue when it's saying one thing to your customers and it's wrong. So a lot of the internal first generation of these enterprise applications are being built internally for productivity gains mostly. And we're seeing those, and those still have issues that need to be addressed, and Sidecar can help with that.
At the same time, keeping the knowledge intact for inside the company.
Yeah. Exactly right.
You mentioned about Sidecar as a firewall. Who are your ideal clients? Who are your ideal customers? Are these fintech institutions or maybe healthcare, large corporations, medium corporations?
Yeah. Today we're dealing with enterprises of all sizes. We're excited that we're actually going to be releasing a version of this for consumers. So we want AI safety to be available for everyone. We'll be launching that over the next month, I hope. But it goes all the way from large enterprises all the way down to smaller enterprises. Today, most of the R&D research or the folks putting out enterprise applications with AI are the larger enterprises. So that tends to be where most of our work is being done. But we have a SaaS API, so mid organizations can use it, get up to speed very quickly and use it. and we're coming out with a consumer version, so hopefully everyone can use it. But it's largely where the use case is really important that you get it right and that you're robust. And so we are working with a lot of financial institutions that are regulated. We are working with healthcare companies. We're working with manufacturers. A good example of that is if you take an application for chemicals and advice on what version or what dilution to use or what chemicals to mix together, very important that you get that right or something blows up, right? So you need to have that level of safety. In the life sciences, similarly, you need to make sure that the information coming back is evidenced properly and accurate. And data leakage is very, very much a concern in, of course, the medical industry. So we're dealing on several fronts there. With financial institutions, the level of precision, there are a whole bunch of compliance and regulations around what can be shared where, but also being consistent with your policies becomes very difficult when you have 300 policies, of which they're each 100 pages long. And so AI can be excellent at helping ensure that. And so we have this policy compliance piece where it can ensure that it's being compliant.
That's amazing. Then, and as you said that you are launching it next month for everyone. So that would be great to try on. I would love to do that. I need to save the data and everything that I have. At the same time, I would ask you about hallucinations. You mentioned that if lawyers are using something and they're giving like cases that never happened, and it has happened before. Lawyer was suspended in US because he gave wrong information, and when judge asked him, he said that he used ChatGPT, and they found out there was no case like that. So how does Autoalign help in mitigating hallucinations?
Yeah, and that's actually, I think when we're deploying this AI safety for consumers, like this, that will be a big part of this. So we're going to help everybody detect when AI is hallucinating. And so with different data sets, we can go in, and our system is meant as that safety check that can go and say, okay, it's saying this, is that true? And go and dig in and make an assessment. And so it's that extra supervisor layer that says, okay, I'm going to just double check things before we send it through and flag it if there's an issue. And so if I'm a consumer using this on a website and I want to fact check this, that's going to be very possible with our tool, where it's going to then be able to go in and do some research. Now, what is it fact checking against depends on the use case and who's the owner of truth. We don't want to be the definitive judge of what's fact or not. So we're letting enterprises plug in whatever they think is the right factual base, and it's probably their documents, right? It's their fact sets that they believe is the truth, content from them, and we compare against that. For consumers, we can do it more broadly and have a general fact checker, but we are going to get into problems of, one site says that's true, one site says it's not, and so our job there is to sort of give you the evidence and let you decide at that point. It's not our goal to be the judge and jury and executioner on these things. Our goal is to help bring you the right pieces of information to be able to understand that that's a hallucination and be able to react to it accordingly. And that layer in Sidecar, I have to highlight, is not, it's built on some similar technologies, but it's not itself an LLM. And what we found is that, if you're using an LLM to do this stuff, it's going to be subjected to the same issues that all LLMs are subjected to. We've seen, for example, transference, where if you can jailbreak OpenAI's model, you can probably jailbreak Claude's model. There's a lot of transference between the two because they're highly similar underneath. They've been trained on the same things. They have the same architectures, are very similar. And so we're not using the exact same technology when we're doing that supervisor layer. It means that we're not going to be subjected to the same sensitivities, and that's important. So there's a bunch of technical details in there, but it's very true that, hallucinations even are very similar across models often. So you can go in and ask one model one question, ask a different model from a different vendor that question, and you might get the same similar hallucinations, even though they're different models. And so we're a layer separate from that. And that's a great thing too for enterprises and for consumers. It means that you can switch around your models. We can be this steady layer in front of it. So you can decide one day that you're switching from a commercial model to the latest Llama 3.2 model that just came out from Meta that's open source, and still have preserved that consistent safety layer in front of it. And you have more flexibility then to do that. And it's a layer separate from that model. So just really important for enterprises to keep that in mind. For consumers, that means that it's going to be generally applicable. So you will be able to use this across the different model types as well.
Right. Yeah. That's great. How does prompt injections, how are they made, and how do you prevent those? How does Autoalign helps in it? And I heard about this term that prompt injections can be made. I was like, wow, that looks highly serious. And if prompt injections are there, that's gonna be a problem. So how does that happen?
Well, speaking of a cat and mouse game, prompt injections were originally mostly made manually, but there's no reason why AI can't create these either and just go and spam and try to create them. And so you are left with an AI system that has some training of starting prompt injections. The AI systems themselves, the fundamental foundational model providers, are actually getting much better at detecting a lot of these prompt injections and preventing them, or jailbreaking as well. Jailbreaking might be things like, I'm going to role play and pretend I'm somebody to get the model to answer something it shouldn't answer. Prompt injection is more, I'm going to trick the model to either do something or leak something by adding in some string to my query and getting it to execute with it later, or something to that effect. And so they're similar in some ways, but you can go now take AI systems and just iterate and iterate and iterate until it finds one that works on a local model. So you can take a local LLM, you can iterate on it till you find one. And then guess what? Because of that transference principle, it will probably then work on the OpenAI model. So you don't even have to ping OpenAI's model. So a lot of these prompt injections are being created that way. They're synthetically generated. You can create them, iterate. They get very complicated. They might have very long suffixes, for example. There's different fields of them. They might be very much multi-step, where they're a series of things like, here's the first thing, remember it, go back and do another prompt with the next step. And then in the last prompt, put it all together, like, hey, now add all those together and decode it for me. And something happens at that point. You can also ask it to retrieve something. And that retrieved content could have harmful content in it. And then in another step, ask it to execute something against that content. So they're getting very sophisticated. There's a bunch of different approaches there. The main thing I would say is that enterprises have to be very concerned about that. As a consumer, it's generally not so much. You generally yourself know if you're prompt injecting something or you're jailbreaking something, right? So enterprises have to be very wary. That's why a lot of their applications are being put in for their internal employees today and not being exposed out to consumers, because then that would allow different actors to try out the different prompt injections against those enterprises and potentially cause harm.
Amazing. Dan, I got to know that Autoalign helps in getting away from vendor lock-in. How important it is to not have vendor locks in AI, because there are so many things that are coming up and how things are happening. Companies or people may want to try many things. How do you help? How does Autoalign help there?
Yeah, so Autoalign can actually give them one of the side effects or benefits is Autoalign can give them a consistent interface they can actually choose from a bunch of different interfaces or APIs, and then have Autoalign interact with the model, working on those common safety layers. And that's really important that you have that standard, because you don't want to go back to the drawing board every time you upgrade from Llama 3 to 3.1 to 3.2 and have to redo all of that work if you do it yourself. Or even if you're switching from an OpenAI model to a Llama model, or vice versa, or you're switching across vendors. Like you said, every week there's a new model coming out.
Yeah.
And I mean by that, there's tons of models coming out, but every week there's a new top model coming out, right? At the leaderboard level for different parts, either, open source or commercially, in text to vision or in LLMs or multimodal, right? All of these different areas, they generally have new models. So why would you lock yourself in, right?
And that's
You're
more
sort of,
important. And that's more, I'm sorry for cutting in. That's more important for AI because AIs would create AIs faster. So
yes, yeah.
we want to see
We're
what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be locked in. And, all the vendors would love you to be locked in, but it's a big mistake if you're putting all your resources in one basket and forced to use that as a decision. But if you look traditionally in the software space or enterprise space, that's a problem. Most enterprises like to pick their solution and then stick with it for years, right? And in this one case, I'd say that's a real mistake to do that.
But at the same time, why enterprises do it is because they have to train a large set of people, and some people are quick learners. Some learn on average basis. Some learn quite slowly. So once people have learned something, they don't want to go back and train people again and again into something new.
Yeah, and these applications might have the same front end, and you should keep that consistent, right? But so they can use it in the same way, but that underlying model underneath might need to be switched out. And so you should design for that when you're building out an AI application, that you can actually upgrade your model and keep everything else the same, the user experience the same. The users shouldn't even necessarily know that you've switched models. Maybe there's some greater capability that you can say, hey, this is new, but you can keep the experience the same, and you should design for an experience where you could switch out models.
Right, right. Dan, thank you very much for the podcast. There's just one last question I want to have from you. What's the next big thing you think, which is coming out in AI safety?
Oh, well, yeah, self-servingly, I'd say we're very excited about our consumer release. I think to be able to bring AI safety to everyone will be a great step forward. That said, we're seeing a lot of friction right now about at what level should foundation model providers provide a baseline of safety. How do they cover every use case when they haven't contemplated every use case? Right? How do they? But on the other hand, they're responsible for their models and their actions, right? So there's a lot of friction there. I expect over the next year, a lot of the regulatory landscape to smooth out, meaning that will be settled and or in a proper direction. There's the California Act that was just scuttled today, but there's a bunch of regulatory landscape issues that are getting flushed out. In the meantime, I think we're going to see enterprises, when they put these things into production, have their own layers of safety, and I think that will remain. So I think that's going to be this tidal wave that allows AI to be used more broadly over the next year, and that's exciting to see.
Amazing. Let's see how that shapes out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the podcast, Dan. It has been an amazing discussion, and I think that one discussion, cannot give a huge meaning to it. But I think I would want to do and learn more from you in coming times. So we might do it again sometime later.
Thank you very much. Great to be on with you. I appreciate it.